Hi everyone, this is the third lecture of week 9, and again a reminder to please keep up with your readings from the biblical text and from Coogan, as I'm going to ask you questions from those two things even though I don't discuss them in the videos. Today we are going to be looking at one of the more famous of Israelite judges, the stories about Samson, and as the stories about Samson are long and numerous, I'm going to have to do a very, this video is going to be rather short considering, or I'm going to have to go very fast, okay? This is another way to say, please read the biblical text, especially on the story of Samson, as I cannot do, this kind of complicated, I cannot do these stories, which are complicated and varied, justice in these short videos. The birth of Samson begins this way, in Judges 14:2. Okay, we are told that there was, quote, a certain man of Zorah of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren, having borne no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to her and said to her, although you are barren, having borne no children, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now be careful not to drink wine or strong drink or eat anything clean, for you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor is to come to his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth. It is he who shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. So, and actually that was Judges 13, verse 2 and following, not 14. What you have here with the introduction of the birth of Samuel is that we are suddenly told that for some reason, unstated, that an angel appears to an unnamed infertile woman, telling her that she is going to bear a special child, which she does. Now, you've seen this pattern kind of before, okay? However, what has not been seen is what follows this kind of introduction. Okay. Now this, so the angel appears. This is followed by a scene where this unnamed woman tells her not so bright husband Manoah that indeed an angel has appeared to her, telling her that she's going to be pregnant with a special child. Now Manoah, he responds to this by not believing his wife. Okay, and even goes so far as asking that the angel appear again, which he does. And when the angel appears again, we are told that Manoah offers the angel some food, which is a big no-no, right? And which seems to hint that Manoah doesn't recognize this being as an angel, at which point the angel disappears in a flame of fire. This is a very strange story, okay? Manoah then, once the angel disappears in a flame of fire, realizes that this is a divine being, and he wonders aloud whether this means they're going to be killed. Okay, and to this, his wife responds, well, why would God go through all this trouble with the angel just to kill us all at the end? Okay, and this seems to be, and there's many ways to explain this kind of weird back and forth with Manoah and his wife, and the weirdness to Samson's birth narrative. And indeed, as you'll see, Samson is very strange, okay? But maybe the point is to explain where you get Samson's kind of dullness, idiocy kind of from, right? Notice that Manoah, his father, also seems kind of not super intelligent. And indeed, you wonder whether, again, this explains why Samson, who is going to be like this He-Man, all brawn, no brain figure, why he is the way this is, okay? Of course, there's probably other explanations why we have such a bizarre narrative of Samson's birth, okay? This child that this unnamed woman will miraculously conceive, we are told, this child is not supposed to cut his hair or drink alcohol or eat anything unclean. And all those requirements are part of what is known as the Nazarite vow. Now, we don't know that much about Nazarites and the Nazarite vow. Although some do wonder whether John the Baptist was a Nazarite, there's some aspects of him that seem similar. What we know is that this vow, most people usually took this vow for a period of time, not like lifelong, like you see here in Samson. And it seems to be, you take this vow and you're kind of set apart for a time, maybe kind of special and holy, okay? What you will see, and what is odd about Samson, though, is that, like, even though he's set to be the first Nazir that we have in the biblical text, like, he doesn't follow any requirements of the vow except for the whole hair thing, okay? Indeed, if you think about Samson, especially his conception story, a bit more carefully, again, please read the text, okay? You start reading a story and you realize that a lot of it doesn't really sound super Israelite. Like, there's a really different feel to his stories, okay? Rather, once you read the story, you realize how similar his conception narrative, how it sounds similar to Greco-Roman myths of the conception of divine quasi-human beings, such as Jesus. Okay, there's something really foreign about the stories about Samson. Okay, notice, for example, how it never states that Samson's father Manoah knew or slept with his wife. Okay, instead she gets magically pregnant right after this encounter with this divine angel figure. Okay, moreover, as you go on with the stories about Samson, you'll notice that he is indeed a bit of a weirdo, very special, right? And not because of the Nazarite status, but because he is like, has a superhuman ability. He is like super strong, okay? In short, this sounds very different from the Israelite materials, though it uses some of the themes like the infertile wife that you've seen before, okay? And a lot of people have likened Samson to not Israelite heroes, okay, but to Hercules, Greek heroes, okay? And Hercules, of course, was this super strong, half divine hero in Greek myths, okay? That the story of Samson sounds more Grecian than Israelite, then this might seem surprising until you notice the context of his birth. We are told that at this time, Israel is being oppressed by a group called the Philistines. And so who are the Philistines? Okay. Well, what we know about them is that they were part of this larger marauding seafaring group called the Sea Peoples, who come and land, they first go to Egypt and like wreak havoc there. But who end up coming to the coast, and they like sack a bunch of cities between the 12th and this 10th century. Okay, and most biblicists who look at pottery, they look at pot shards and things like that, think that they can trace back where the Sea Peoples and the Philistines came from, and they think that the Philistines, the group that land on the coast of the Levant, were originally Aegean in origins. That is, they were Greek. Okay. Now the Philistines, when they landed, of course they destroyed a bunch of stuff, but they didn't destroy everything, right? Rather, like all groups that come in, they destroy to some degree, but of course they settle, they intermingle, they intermarry, they become larger part of the larger group that is already living there. Okay, and so notice, how interesting. Notice the interesting context of the story of Samson. Okay, notice that the story of Samson sounds very much like a story about a Greek hero, which takes place in the context of a Greek or Aegean people invading and settling in Israel. Okay, notice even that the tribe that Samson is from is also odd, right? Samson is from the tribe of Dan. And notice that we don't hear much about Dan thus far. Okay, indeed, some wonder if the silence is due to Dan being one of the actual, that he wasn't a really early tribe. Dan was a later tribe to join the Israelite Confederacy. And some have even wondered whether Dan is not just a later tribe, but maybe also originally Greek in origins. Okay, in the list of the Sea Peoples, oddly, there is a group called the Danoi. And some wonder whether the origins of Dan is actually these Danoids. Okay, we don't know. These are just guesses. Okay, perhaps this background explains why Samson is so mixed, so un-Israelite seeming. Okay, his story, which centers on the bad things that happen when Israelites and Philistines meet and come together, right? Depicted as Samson getting perpetually involved with these Philistine and foreign women. Okay, notice how this happens in a context where such intermingling was likely taking place. Okay, moreover, Samson, who is really this mixed Israelite Greek hero, right, is depicted or transformed into something that is wholly Israelite. Okay, something that fights the Philistines, though he looks like a Philistine. Okay, so notice the kind of complicated visions of identity that is reflected in this tale, or in these tales about Samson. Okay. Now, what is not complicated, however, is the person or the characterization of Samson himself, who is depicted as this kind of like surly, aggressive, like kind of dummy, like he's all a he-man, okay? Kind of like the ultimate epitome of what we now term toxic masculinity, but which in the ancient world was probably called just masculinity. Okay, and you see this kind of portrayal of Samson in the first story that we have about him in Judges 14. Again, Unfortunately, because the stories about Samson are so long, I have to go extremely fast, okay? We are told in Judges 14 that Samson decides to marry a Philistine woman, which, displeases his parents, but which we are told is part of some mysterious plan of God, okay? And on Samson's trip, so Samson goes on a little trip to discuss things with her, and on this little trip, we are told that he encounters a lion, okay? At which point, the Spirit of God comes over him, turning him into a kind of Hulk-like figure, okay? And they become so full of power and rage or strength or whatever that we are told that he tears the lion in half, okay? Now, on his way back, so then he goes on, visits with the woman. On his way back from this meeting, he finds or encounters the same carcass of this lion, which he torn into, now filled with honey. And we are told that he takes some of this honey and eats it, thereby violating the Nazirite vow, abstaining from unclean foods, including dead bodies. Okay, so notice how bizarre this sounds. Okay, the weirdness does not end there. Okay, because this lion thing is like entirely a setup for this bachelor party called a mishte, okay, literally a drinking festival that's coming up, okay? We are told that Samson, to prepare for his wedding, has this kind of mishte or drinking bachelor party, okay? And notice again how Samson is again breaking a vow, right? No alcohol, this Nazirite vow, he's constantly breaking this, okay? In the midst of this bachelor party mishte drinking fest, Samson decides to stir things up a bit. Okay, so this is what we are told, okay, 14 verse 10 and following. Now his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as young men were accustomed to do. And when the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Notice how they don't trust Samson, okay? Samson said to them, "Let me put a riddle to you. If you can explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments." So they said to him, "Ask your riddle, let us hear it." And he said, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. But for 3 days they could not explain the riddle." We are told that Samson, at his bachelor party, okay, decides to have some fun by telling a riddle or a wise saying, okay? But notice how this riddle is like the weirdest riddle there is, okay? Notice how this riddle, right, is not so much a riddle as maybe like an answer to a riddle. It's backwards. It doesn't ask a question, okay? Moreover, remember, usually riddles pertain to larger experiences or larger knowledge that everyone has. Okay, that's how you're able to guess the answer to a riddle, right? But notice how Samson's riddle is the opposite. It's very specific, very personal, referring to that weird lion encounter that he had that no one else could possibly know about or can conjure up, okay? No wonder the Philistines, his soon-to-be in-laws, have an incredibly hard time guessing the answer. Indeed, they have such a hard time that they cheat, right? Going to Samson's fiance, we are told, and threatening her by telling her that they are going to burn down her and her father's house if she does not get the answer from Samson. So notice how things have escalated, okay? And with that threat hanging on her, this is what she does. She pleads and nags with her soon-to-be husband for 7 days, at which point this is what happens. And this is Judges 14, verses 17 and following. She wept before him 7 days, that their feast lasted. And because she nagged him, on the 7th day he told her, and then she explained the riddle to her people. And the men of the town said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than the lion?" And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would have not found out my riddle." And then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. And he went down to Ashkelon, and he killed 30 men of the town, took their spoil, gave the festal garments to those who had explained the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. This is one of the craziest and most amazing, right, weddings I've ever heard of, right? It sounds like a lot of fun, or a lot of stuff. So what is this story about? Okay, well, the most the clear answer is it's hard not to see that this is a story that acts as a warning against intermarriage, okay, especially with the Philistines, right? And remember that some of the biblical texts are fine with exogamy, outsider marriages, and others are not, and this may be one that's not. Okay, notice how weddings and the games that occur in them, these are all supposedly things that are meant to bring two different families and two different groups of people together. But in this wedding, the opposite happens, okay? It's used to drive them further apart, okay? Notice also the themes of riddles and riddling that you see, okay? And notice that these particular riddles take place in the larger context of a larger riddle, right? Some mysterious riddle by God, okay? To use Samson's act of intermarriage as a way to get back at the Philistines, Israel's enemies, okay? Indeed, some have argued that riddles define Samson and his stories in general, that his stories are really riddles within riddles within riddles, okay? And I will go back to this idea in a moment, okay? In this case, let's look at more closely the two riddles that are present in this story. And indeed, there are two riddles and probably multiple answers. Okay, so the first riddle, which is the one that Samson poses to his party mates. Okay, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Okay, as I noticed, the real answer, as the story tells us, is like this lion thing Samson goes through. Okay. And you're like, how is this an answer to anything? Okay, but it is kind of an answer. So let's think about the lion thing and this riddle in a slightly different way. Okay, imagine that you are at a body no good bachelor party and you all decide to tell jokes. Think about what kind of jokes these are, probably dirty jokes. Okay, and what would be, now think about in the context of such a party, what the likely answer to this riddle would be. Okay, and you got to think like an English major. Okay, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Think about the image of this. Okay, what this refers to. The image is of a lion's carcass torn in two with honey oozing from it that Samson eats. Okay, what's the answer? What's the image pointing you to? And usually in class, I tell students like who can't guess the answer, I'm like, just ask your roommates. Okay, however, as this is recorded, I'm just going to tell you, right? Notice that the answer that Samson is tricking his frenemies to say is probably oral sex. Okay, the lion's carcass filled with honey, and honey is a very important item. It's liminal. It's neither one. It's not liquid nor solid. Okay. It also symbolizes fertility and is eaten at wedding feasts. Notice it's a mysteriously sweet substance, okay? Notice how this image of a lion's carcass filled with oozing honey, notice how this hints of this false answer, okay? I'm going to talk about the line a little bit in a moment, okay? Now, okay, so notice how he's driving you to go with one answer, but that's not the right answer, okay? Now, let's take a look at the answers that the Philistines give him, right, which is supposedly the right answer, okay? But notice how their answer sounds more like the riddle than the answer, okay? And this is their riddle answer, okay? What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than the lion? This is the question, and yet that's the answer, okay? Again, so now we have to think about their answer as also a kind of riddle. So what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than the lion, okay? Again, this is in the context of a wedding, okay? And so what are some possible answers? Well, the most obvious one is love, right? What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Love, maybe possibly sex, okay? But notice how as the narrative plays out, that this might not be the only answer. There's other possible answers. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Well, violence or revenge or warfare or death. These are also perhaps sweeter than honey and stronger than a lion. Okay, notice interestingly these things, especially death, which is kind of the aftermath of warfare, violence and revenge and rage, notice how they are all also plausible answers to Samson's original riddle as well. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Notice that this can also refer to a corpse. okay, where a human body, because they're dead, becomes food for animals, okay, or becomes filled with maggots and is eaten up, okay. Notice how, notice again, there's riddles within riddles here, okay. So there's another riddle, okay. So why a lion? Okay, you know, he tears a lion in half. Okay, well, lions symbolize strength and fecundity and power. So perhaps a lion is featured here to set up for the story that comes after this one. Okay, indeed, the story about this Philistine woman is merely kind of like a test case, you know, a tease for the more infamous story of Samson and Delilah, where Samson again will get involved with an inappropriate woman, but this time will pay the price. Okay. So how does the lion fit into all of this? Okay. Well, one thing that the lion symbolized was the sun. Why, you know, if you look at the Lion King, for example, right? Notice, you know, the manes, I mean, you know, a lion's face looks like the sun. Okay. And interestingly, the meaning of Samson's name, which is another riddle, and people do posit different things. One possible meaning, probably the right meaning, is that Samson's Shamshan, it comes from the word, his name comes from the word Shemesh, which means the sun. Okay, or the name of this person might be, Samson might be the sun child. Of course, this would fit with his kind of Grecian foreign origins. Okay. And what's really important about Samson being called a sun child, right, is that it really fits with the next story about Delilah. Okay, and of course, Delilah's name is also telling, right? Delilah probably is related to the word Lila, or the word for night. Okay, and of course, the story of Samson and Delilah is about how Delilah, night, puts out to some degree the light of the sun child, Samson. Okay. That lions also symbolize strength, a kind of uncontained wild strength, right? That was interpreted sometimes as leading to arrogance, that is having too much pride in one's strength, right? Think about how well this fits, right? This kind of lion imagery and the symbolism of the lion, how well this fits as a kind of setup for the story about Samson and Delilah, okay, which was found in Judges 16, and which will now describe how Samson's arrogance or pride, or certainly one reading, in his own strength will help to bring him down, okay? And again, I'm going to go very fast, okay? And this is how the story of Samson and Delilah goes, okay? Judges 16, verse 4 and following states that Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who we are told lives in the valley of Sorek, which is really this borderland between Philistine and Israel. So she's really in a liminal place, and it's actually unclear what she is. Is she Philistine or an Israelite? Like, which team is she on? Okay, indeed, Delilah too is a kind of riddle and mystery. Okay, what does become clear, because of course we're told that the Philistines will pay her a lot of money to find out the source of Samson's strength, is that Delilah seems to be a kind of mercenary figure. Okay, she can play for any team, okay, as long as you pay her. Okay, so notice that when they pay her to find out the source of Samson's strength, now again you get a second riddle, or a third, another riddle. Okay, what makes Samson so strong? Okay, and so once she agrees to take payment for figuring this riddle out, this is what happens, and we are told this in chapter 16, verse 6 and following. So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes your strength so great, and how you can be bound so that one can subdue you." And Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that are not dried out, then I shall become weak and be like anyone else." And then the Lord of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not dried out, and she bound them with them. And while the men were lying in wait in an inner chamber, she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he snapped the bowstrings as a strand of fiber snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Again, please read the biblical text of the story. It's really fun, okay? This happens 2 more times in exactly the same way, okay? And again, you're wondering whether Samson is really dumb. Okay, but anyways, after stating that his source of strength was the 7 fresh bowstrings, then subsequently Samson tells her that the secret is being bound with new rope, and then finally tells her that the secret of his strength is weaving his hair into 7 locks with the web and tightening it with a pin. And each time he tells her this kind of faux secret, she does this, she calls upon the Philistines, who then try to kind of capture him, and then of course it's discovered that he lied. Okay, and this continues again 3 times in total. until the final time, which is described in verse 16 and following. Finally, after she had nagged him with words day after day and pestered him, he was tired to death. So he told her the whole secret and said to her, "A razor has not come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, then my strength would leave me. I would become weak and be like anyone else." And at this point, okay, after telling her that, she lets Samson fall asleep on her lap, shaves his head, calls upon the Philistine, at which point this happens. Okay. Verse 20, when he awoke from his sleep, he thought, "I will go out as other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. So the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. Again, notice the name, Delilah Knight, okay? They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in the prison, but the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Okay, so there's a lot to interpret in the story. Okay, again, I'm running out of time, so I have to be very quick. So let's start with the hair. Okay, notice how Samson's false answers, bowstrings, the new ropes, and pin, loom, and web all resemble hair, right? So he keeps getting closer and closer to the right answer. Okay, but why hair at all? Like, why is this the right answer? Okay, why is not cutting one's hair the source of divine strength? Okay. Well, notice that Samson, especially in other stories that I did not have time to go over, notice that he's portrayed as this, like I said, this kind of all brawn, no brain, raw, feral ubermensch, right? He's kind of uncultivated, wild, like all masculine idiot energy, okay? Well, God is interestingly kind of envisioned as similar, okay? Wild, uncultivated, he likes camping and he likes steak and your man's man crap, okay? And hair, uncut in particular, is symbolic of this wild, uncultivated nature, okay? And cut hair or cultivated hair, putting hair in a hairstyle, is the opposite. It symbolizes society and culture and domestication, that you're fit to belong or to walk around in society. And therefore, right, as a man, a man who has cut hair or styled hair would be seen as a man deprived of their wild, feral, natural state. Okay. We've seen similar ideas before with the story of Adam and Eve. Remember that this idea of women as those who domesticate men. Okay. Notice that all the answers, and you'll see something similar here. Notice that all the false answers that Samson gives to Delilah involve hair or hair-like things that become increasingly cultured, increasingly worked at by human hands, until finally you get to the pin, loom, and needle, which is weaving, which was a work mainly done by women. Okay, so there's two answers here, right? What is the source of Samson's strength? Well, it's hair or this wildness. What is the source of Samson's weakness? Hair or women, okay? So one reading of the story is about kind of a different riddle, okay, or another riddle, okay? What can bring down even the strongest of men, okay? And the answer seems to be women, or the power of women to domesticate men, which in this story is symbolized or analogized to Samson getting a haircut and being brought down by Delilah. Okay, notice again how the variety of portrayal of women here as foreigners, victims, pawns. Okay, and for example, Samson's first wife, and also as a defeater of the strongest man. Okay, notice that there may be other riddles here that the narrative is trying to answer as well. What is a woman and what makes her strong? What is the source of her strength and what makes her weak? What is a man and what makes him strong or him weak? Okay. Finally, a last riddle, okay, answered by this kind of glorious conclusion to the Samson narrative. Samson, at the very end of his narrative, is called to perform for the Philistines as a kind of clown during a big gathering of Philistine bigwigs or leaders, okay, which he does, okay. However, we are told that Samson, whose hair has started to grow, at this point is humble. Okay, he's lost that arrogance. Okay, and he is so humble that he prays to God one last time to give him one last burst of strength, which God does. Okay, and which Samson uses to bring down the pillars of the house, thereby killing not only himself but also a bunch of the Philistine enemy. At which point the writer, the Israelite writer, gleefully ends his tale by telling the reader in chapter 16, verse 30, so those he, that is Samson, killed at his death were more than those he killed during his life. Okay, and with this, you might get now an answer to another riddle. What is stronger or better than physical strength? Okay, and notice what the narrative answers. Humbleness and humility before your God, who will give you more strength than you thought was ever possible.